what do you feel about the motion of the United Nations motion this week? How does that change anything?
Well, that of course was utterly meaningless. It called, upon parties to create the conditions for a ceasefire, which means nothing whatsoever. And it deleted the parts about putting the United Nations in sole charge of aid distribution, and that was done at US insistence in order to enable Israel to continue to throttle the supply of aid. And of course, famously, it didn't call for a ceasefire. So there was no point at all in passing that resolution. The UAE went ahead of it as a kind of face-saving measure. It means nothing whatsoever. And in terms of diplomatic action, nothing is happening. There's simply nobody. The only people in the world who are willing to actually do anything to try to help the Palestinians are the Houthis, who are, of course, themselves an incredibly repressed people, and we remain in this completely shameful position.
So, with regards to calling out genocide and the possibility of these politicians, leaders, world leaders facing the International Criminal Court, do you think that they are in any way trying to backtrack on where they've been in order to avoid that, or do you think they've got no fear of that whatsoever?
I think they just don't believe it will happen. It's astonishing to me it hasn't happened already, because this is very, very plainly a genocide. Srebrenica was ruled an act of genocide by the International Court of Justice, and that was a massacre, which was a tiny proportion of the scale of the massacre in Gaza. And any state can go. Certainly any one of the 149 states who are members of the Genocide Convention can go to the International Court of Justice. First, they have to report it as a genocide to the United Nations. If it is disputed, then it goes to the International Court of Justice for a ruling. And certainly any one of 149 states who are a member of the convention can do that. And arguably, any state can do it at all. You don't necessarily even have to be a member of the convention. So it absolutely astonishes me that no member state has called out genocide, reported it to the UN, and gone to the International Court of Justice. Not South Africa, not Colombia, not Venezuela, not Russia, not Brazil, none of the states who appear to be supporting Palestine and had reported Israel to the International Criminal Court, which everybody knows won't do anything because it's a Western tool. None of them are prepared to take the only possible effective action of reporting it to the ICJ, and that's really quite astonishing. It really is appalling and extremely frustrating.
What is that? Because they're worried of trade, or they'll lose all their trade in the United States or something? Is it as simple as that, do you think?
Yeah, everybody's worried about reprisals from the United States because it's seen as, if you like, a nuclear option. Because once you get a judgment of genocide from the ICJ, they're going to have to be arrest warrants issued by the ICC. The ICC isn't able to, from the ICJ, that this is a genocide. And the convention explicitly includes complicity in genocide. That's an article in the convention. So, and again, it's impossible to argue that Biden and Sunak and von Leyen and various others are not complicit. So this would really be, an absolute shock to the international governance system and to the power structures of the West. It surprises me, for example, Putin having been reported to the International Criminal Court for far lesser alleged crimes in Ukraine. It amazes me that Russia hasn't been prepared to take this step. Um, increasingly, they're all hiding behind the Palestinian Authority. I've continued to speak to diplomats and to lobby and speak to ministers in some cases. And what if you like, the progressive countries of the world have united behind a line that they will unite behind the Palestinian Authority. And the Palestinian Authority itself is a party to the Genocide Convention and can report Israel for genocide. And the Palestinian Authority hasn't done it. And that's the excuse everyone else is now using for not doing it.
Oh, I see. Right. Well, that makes it even more confusing. But it sounds to me like the US has got a stranglehold on the world's diplomats in some way. Is that reflective of also the Julian Assange case? I mean, that you're very involved in, and just want to say before we finish the interview that it's an honor to speak to you. I know how courageous you've been with that and your journalistic integrity as well. How would you link Julian Assange's case with the way that people are ignoring Palestine's genocide?
It's a very similar thing. I mean, I've also in Geneva been talking to diplomats from around the world and to the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, to his office, about the case of Julian Assange. And again, everybody's scared to take it on because they are scared of the United States. It's only when you get into the nitty-gritty of it that you realize just how powerful the United States remains, particularly in terms of trade, for example. And just to give one example, Venezuela has recently come to an agreement with the United States over the partial lifting of oil sanctions that have been crippling that country for years and years. So Venezuela doesn't currently want to stand out against the US. And of course, there's also the fear of assassination. The CIA will kill you if you take firm action against the United States and Israel. So these things are very, very difficult. And I'd like to just mention that the repression in the United Kingdom is getting worse and worse and worse. You've probably seen that Tony Greenstein was raided by the
he's on the show. He's on the show today. So.
All right, yeah. Tony's a good man. That's why I'm sitting here today in a airport hotel in Milan, because I was detained under the Terrorism Act and questioned by police, and I'm under investigation for terrorism. And in my own case, we know that if they charge me, I'll be 2 years in Stockton jail awaiting trial. I'm not scared of a jury trial. I don't want to spend 2 years on remand in jail. And this use of terrorism legislation to ban supporters of Palestine as terrorists is just astonishing. And people like myself and Tony and Mick Napier, we are kind of a high-profile examples. There are many more people charged for just waving a placard or brandishing a Palestinian flag when the police don't want them to. And this use of a wave of repression is something we're seeing. In Germany, they've arrested people, and in Denmark, as alleged Hamas terrorists, claiming they were planning to carry out terrorist attacks in Europe on behalf of Hamas. That's plainly a lie. That's an utterly false narrative. Hamas have never, ever carried out any action outside of Palestine. And it would be crazy for them to do so now. There's no evidence whatsoever of any intent. And that's to justify the extreme repression of pro-Palestinian views in countries like Germany and Denmark. So we're seeing this perfect storm, if you like. We're seeing even nations cowed into inaction over the Genocide Convention. We're seeing individual protesters targeted and their liberty threatened, and certainly their right of free speech and freedom of association being removed. And we're starting to see the ramping up of the old Islamophobia narratives that we had under the war on terror, of all kinds of fake and false terror plots being invented by the authorities. But these are very dark times.